Hi, students. Welcome to the massive open online course on international economics. This is a module that talks on infant industry argument. So, this module, a part of international trade policy. Students, you remember that till module 24, you learn a lot of issues that talks about international trade theory. And then from module 25, you started focusing on international trade policy. So forget about international trade policy. And then you discussed a few issues like tariff and quota. It may be that there is something called voluntary export restraint. There may be other kind of policies that influences international transaction of goods and services. And you are also exposed to the various facets of policies that affects countries depending on whether they are small or large. And then you learn a bit about tariff and quota. Now, this is the application of a policy. So, this is applied part of applied international trade. So, applied international trade is trade policy, and this is again the effect of this trade policy. Now, infant industry argument. An industry which is infant. So, is there any argument around that thing? Now, before I move to explaining this infant industry argument, I want to tell you the structure of today's module, and then we'll give you one example of trade policy that has been adopted in Britain long ago. But before that, the structure of today's lecture is that, of course, after introduction, I will go for spending few minutes on the background for protectionism. So, infant industry argument is an application of protectionist policy. And then, what is exactly the concept of infant industry argument? And then, is there any criticism? Maybe yes. Then what is the criticism? And if the criticisms are valid or not? And then, very briefly and quickly, we will touch upon some aspects of Indian economy that goes with infant industry argument. And then, of course, as you know, we will produce a concluding slide or concluding remarks. Students, you remember that in our childhood, what we experienced, and there is a popular saying. The saying goes like this, that nurse the baby, protect the child, and free the adult. So when there is a baby, we need to nurse them. And after certain years, when it is child, you protect them. You allow them to walk. You allow them to play, but you monitor them. And then when the child becomes adult, you free them. You allow them to mix with others. You allow them to mix with the world so that he or she can develop himself or herself to compete with the entire world for his or her own sustenance. The same argument is applied here. So you need to protect your baby. You need to protect your child. At the very nascent stage, we need to nurture them. Otherwise, they would not be able to survive, they would not be able to develop, and they would not be able to compete with the entire world in years to come. And this argument flows like the popular saying that I just said. So the infant industry argument is perhaps the oldest and the best known argument for protectionism. Students, in your economic thought or in your development economics, probably you came across the concept of Corn Law. Corn Law was used in Britain in order to protect something. I'll explain what. The Britain government imposed a kind of restriction on the import of corn. Corn means food production, food. So food was relatively cheaper abroad, particularly in, say, other countries. I'm not saying the name of other countries. So if it is true, then if you go for free trade, then the British people would like to buy the good from abroad because it is cheaper there. If they buy this good from abroad, then the farmer of the Britain will have to face some loss. In order to protect them, the British government put a restriction on the import of food from another country. So what happened? As a result of protection on food import, the food price went up in Britain. And when the food price went up in Britain, the farmers were very happy. So the point is that when you give protectionism, when you go for protectionism, when you protect someone, the protected person will feel happy. The same thing happened in Britain. They were very happy. But as a result, what happened? The food price went up in Britain. Since food is an essential element for survival, in order to compensate for higher price for food, the manufacturing workers, they asked for higher wage. And asked for a higher wage means the cost of producing manufacturing good was higher then. So therefore, the profit of the manufacturing or the industry went down. Since the profit was low, the amount of investment in the economy as a whole was declining. And if the investment goes down, the economic development process will be halted. So, apprehending all these things, the industrialists in Britain, they went for agitation. And then that led to repeal of corn law in Daden, Britain. And in Britain Parliament, government had to repeal this corn law. So that was another argument of protectionism. So if you protect, the protected person will feel happy and they will be benefited. But what is the purpose of giving protection? If you really need protection, then you should go for it. The infant industry argument is just like that. When you need this protection, you go for it. The question is whether you will continue with this protectionism or continue with these protectionist policies for a long time. That is not sure. That is why this infant industry argument is always a debatable thing. The American economists Raymond and Frederick List picked this idea of protectionism and then introduced this infant industry argument systematically. So now on the basis of this thing, why an industry needs protection? So the idea that when the industry is a kind of baby, nascent stage, maybe that it is not able to compete with already prevailing manufacturing units in the market. So maybe that requires some sort of protection in terms of subsidy, in terms of kind of price support or any other policies. And if this production unit is exposed to the international market, you need to do something so that the international commodity cannot come. So that is the basic idea of protectionism. So domestic industry, when it is too young, cannot compete with the well-established foreign industries because we are talking about international trade. So it suffers losses when faced with the world prices under free trade. And then what to do? In order to control the coming or inflow of foreign goods, we have to do something at the border. So what can be done? The government can go for putting a tariff, imposition of tariff on the import of the good. So whenever I want to buy a commodity from my neighboring countries, I need to pay something. I need to pay some money. That is over and above the cost of production or the price. Say the price is rupees 100 and the tariff is 10%. If it is 10%, then the tariff inclusive price that I have to pay. So how much I have to pay? 100 plus 10% of 100. So it is 10. So the tariff inclusive price becomes 110. Means if my domestic industry's cost of production is less than 100, then it's fine. But if it is 105, now we compare two situations. The domestic industry can produce at a price 105. Now foreign country can sell their product at rupees 100. So why should I buy from domestic market? Because the price is higher, I should not. Now the tariff is in place. So if the tariff is in place, the tariff inclusive price becomes 110. Now I find it cheaper to buy from the domestic market. So if I buy from the domestic market, then there is a chance that I might get a benefit in future. So the infant industry argument essentially talks about a trade-off. Trade-off between today and future. Now again, what is the justification behind this infant industry kind of protection? The main reason behind this kind of protectionist policies is the imperfect capital market. Because the investors, the businessmen, they often do not get capital, financial capital at a reasonably low interest rate. If the financier or the bank do not know about me and I want to do some business, they are not going to give me capital, financial capital or loan. So what I need to do, I need to borrow money from the local money lenders. So naturally the cost of production will go up. So what the government can do, government can give me some sort of protection. Don't worry about the bank loan. If you produce this thing, since your cost of production is higher, so I am giving you this protection. You sell in the market because I am controlling or curbing other person to supply in the market. Because even if your cost of production is higher, you charge high price, no problem. So that's the basic idea of protectionism. And the problems of appropriability. Appropriability means, when I do something, I innovate something, or I venture into a business, I am not in a position to appropriate the benefit immediately after it is there. So if there is something, then the government has to help the newly born babies or the infant industries. So that's the basic idea of infant industry argument. So essentially, what I was saying that today you incur cost, your price may go up, but don't worry because I am there to give you support. But on the condition that in future you have to be competent enough to go for a lower cost of production or lower price. Now, let's look at this diagram. This diagram is very interesting, but it is very simple at the same time. Now, this is today and future. So, what I was saying, so it's a comparison between today and future. So, probably students, you know that there is a concept like predatory pricing. Predatory pricing means a firm may enter into the business or enter into the market and say commodity X is being sold at a price rupees 50 and a new firm enters. This firm is offering me the commodity at price rupees 40, knowing fully well that the price is 50. Then why this firm is giving me at rupees 40? Because this firm is incurring loss. But this firm knows that if I sell this product at rupees 40, the existing firms have to quit. They will quit the market. And after 1 or 2 years, this firm, who is now facing loss, he will emerge as the monopolist. The moment he will emerge as the monopolist, he will charge rupees 70. So the entire loss that he incurred in last year will be completely covered and his profit would be much more higher because there is no competition. In order to remove competition from the market, some firms use this predatory pricing policy. Now, essentially, again, it is today and future. So today, the average cost of production is like this and the international price is PW. So international price is PW means if the domestic firm produces, that the price would be much higher than PW. So the domestic firm would not be able to sell its product. So the government can put a tariff by the amount T. So the tariff inclusive price of the world commodity becomes PW by T. It becomes equal to the minimum cost of production of the domestic market of the domestic firm, so that the domestic firm can produce some goods and can survive. And then there are some losses that I will explain in next slide. These are very interesting. But as the firm who is infant now is continuing producing the good for a long time, it is quite natural that after a certain point of time, this firm would turn out as an efficient firm. If the firm turns out as an efficient firm, the average cost of production will go down. Look, from this black line, now it is average cost. In future, it will be much lower. And it is so much so that the equilibrium price of the domestic firm is equal to PW. So this firm is able to compete with the international firms. So the main idea behind this international infant industry argument for the firms is to prepare them to compete with the international firms in future. Let us recast our arguments that we just developed in a much simpler diagram. So this is, as you know, there is partial equilibrium and there is general equilibrium. Partial equilibrium means we will talk about only one good, and in general equilibrium we will talk about two goods. So let us start with the partial equilibrium diagram. The country is small, our assumption. The domestic market for import competing good in the home country, so locally produced computers are there. And country small means the world price for the computer is given. The small country cannot influence the world price. And this world price is given here. Look at this diagram, students, very carefully. OA is the world price for computer. Now, if OA is the world price for computer, and this is the supply curve of the computer, and this is the demand curve for the computer in the domestic market, mind it. So, in the domestic market, the equilibrium takes place at price PA. But since the price is higher than OA, OA is the international price, nobody will buy from here. So, in order to ensure that the domestic computer firm will get some boost, get some incentive, the government imposed a tariff over this PW. And the tariff inclusive price is now PW multiplied by 1 plus T. As long as this PW is constant, there is no difference between specific tariff and ad valorem tariff. So PW plus T or PW into 1 plus T, all are same. So here the tariff inclusive price rose from OA to OA prime. Now when the price is OA prime, what is happening? The production rises from B to B prime and the consumption falls from E to E prime. Look, E was the consumption when the consumers were allowed to buy from the foreign market. So this BE was the amount of import. But now, as a result of tariff, domestic production going up, domestic consumption going down, and the import falls from BE to B prime, E prime, or B dashed, E dashed. So our main target is not to curb import. Our main target is to increase the domestic production. And that has happened here. The domestic production moved up from this point to that point. So as a result of this tariff, you are producing more and you are consuming less. And you are collecting this amount as the tariff revenue because this is the import and this is the tariff part. So what we are doing here, so we are producing more, but we are producing forcefully because normally it should not be produced. So we are putting a kind of distortion, we are putting a kind of injection and then making someone happy, making someone feeling healthy. But that may not be good. So this increase in production is okay for the time being. But if the person concerned who is sick now is not surviving after 1 year or 2 years, it may be the result of this. But if the person survives, then this injection is effective. So we need to ensure that the loss, this is the production loss here and this is the consumption loss. Consumption loss because in spite of paying more, the consumers are consuming less. That should not be the case. When I pay more, I should consume more. But I am not getting the option to consume more because the less import is now done in this economy. So this production loss and consumption loss are actually called deadweight loss in the economy. Now, whether this deadweight loss can be salvaged in future, that there is no guarantee. But the government has to ensure that this firm will not be required to have this tariff protection in future. Means the government may say, I am giving you protection or tariff for 10 years. And after 10 years, you are not going to get this protection. So you have to compete with the world firms. You have to compete with the foreign market at this price PW. So this tariff would no longer be there. So here, so this loss is essentially the same thing that, students, if you remember, that I showed you as a shaded region in my previous diagram. So these are, as I said, this is called the deadweight loss. So now that was the partial equilibrium analysis. Now let's go to the general equilibrium analysis to establish the fact, yes, this kind of policy prescription may lead to a kind of welfare loss, at least in the short run. The general equilibrium analysis is that here I am measuring textile and here I am measuring computers. And this is my PPF, as you know how to draw the PPF. And this is the world price line. The world price line, the production equilibrium takes place at point P, means I am producing this much of computer and this much of computer and this much of textile. And then, given this price line, I can trade with others. So when I am trading with other countries, my consumption equilibrium takes place at point C. So the entire amount, if I draw a vertical line from point C this way, and if I draw a horizontal line from point P leftwards, then what I am going to get? I am going to get a triangle. This triangle, students, you know, this is called trade triangle. And the amount of computer I am importing is this much, and the amount of textile I am exporting is this much. So essentially this textile export and computer import is giving me the volume of trade. So this volume of trade is there when production equilibrium is at point P and the consumption equilibrium is at point C. Now, what happens if I go for a kind of infant industry argument? And I am giving a tariff protection for a sector which I need to protect. And if I need to protect a sector which is computer, then I am giving a tariff protection on computer. So in domestic market, the computer price, tariff inclusive price of the computer is much higher now. So the domestic tariff inclusive price ratio is no longer PW, now it is PD. D stands for domestic market. So this PD has two components. One is PW plus T. T is the tariff rate. So since it is now flatter, the production equilibrium moves from P to P prime. And since I am producing here, but still this line is there for me to trade with others, because I can follow this international price line. So if I follow this international price line, then what would be my consumption pattern, or what would be my consumption? I need to draw a line which is parallel to this PW but passing through this P prime point. If that happens, then this is the case, and there is a shift in PD line. This is a little tricky, but students, this is very simple, because when there is a tariff on computer, the government collects certain amount of revenue. This tariff revenue is going to be distributed among the consumers. So the budget line for the economy as a whole goes up a little bit, because this budget line has two components now: income, produced income, plus tariff revenue. So this tariff revenue inclusive budget line is now like this dotted one here. And you look, the equilibrium takes place at the point where this dotted line and this dotted line are intersecting each other at a point C prime. And surprisingly, what is happening that when the equilibrium is taking place at C prime, the economy is going down from a higher indifference curve to lower indifference curve, indicating that there is a welfare loss. So as a result of tariff in the form of infant industry argument, your computer production is going up, but the economy is losing. So basically the reason is that you are producing that commodity, and you are producing this commodity computer forcefully because you do not have comparative advantage. You do not have efficiency in producing computer. In spite of that, you are producing more of that commodity, and you are forcing the industrialist, the investors, to invest there. And that is why that is coming up with some sort of loss. So this is the point number one. But apart from that, I also have a reduction in the volume of trade when I move from point C to C prime. And this is clearly explained in this diagram. And then very quickly, as I said before, that I will give you a bird's eye view of what is happening in India. So yes, in India, there was infant industry kind of system. There was a protectionism. But from 1985 onwards, the trade liberalization process began, and the drastic changes were made in 1991 because that was the year when we went to new economic policy, I mean NEP, LPG liberalization, privatization, and globalization. And then we were introduced to the system of open general licensing system. So there is nothing like this thing. It should be banned. There should be a tariff on this thing. There is a list of goods, and it is decided by the government. And these protectionist policies are not so stringent now. So it is more like a free trade kind of situation. But the protectionism was there in Indian economy, but we are moving away from protectionist regime towards more like free trade regime. So in the end, we have this thing. An infant industry being protected by a tariff will never feel the requirement to grow and become efficient. If that happens, then the main motive of infant industry argument is gone. But if you can ensure that it will become efficient, then that is good. So in many instances, they do not upgrade their production technique, which can lower the cost and improve the quality of the product as well. So government has to ensure that by taking the advantage of protectionism, they flourish in the future, and after a certain point of time, they can get rid of this protectionist benefit. And it is, however, possible to state that with the same benefits, costs are lower if a subsidy is used instead of tariff. So that is again a very tricky domain that is not going to be explained in much detail here, but maybe that will be discussed in another course that talks about tariff, subsidy, and comparison. So for the time being, this infant industry argument is, I think, understandable to all of you, and you enjoyed this lecture on infant industry argument because this is a very real world like phenomenon, and you have experienced it in your life. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to this argument on infant industry. Thank you, students.